Welcome to the show, Tessa.
Thank you very much for having me, Harris.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tessa. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. How are you?
Good, good. Excited for our conversation today.
Me too, to be fair. Me too.
So, Tessa,
Yes, correct.
tell me a little bit about what is that and how do you do it and anything that you would like to share.
Okay. Well, I guess it's probably useful to start with kind of what do we mean by transition. And I guess I was in industry for a long time and I was involved in a lot of transformation, so business change. And what we saw, and what you'll see when you kind of merge businesses, close them down, etc., is that the change itself happens, but that people take time to adjust to that change.
Right.
And so what we mean when we're talking about transition is about that internal sort of psychological wrestling with the change that's kind of been imposed upon you. And so it's the internal processing when we're talking about transition. That's what we're talking about, how they're responding to a change that has happened. So I think that's a good place to start. And I guess it's also useful to think about how is it different to kind of general coaching. And in many ways, it's very similar. So obviously, there's still deep, active listening and, all the skills of questioning techniques are all still valid. But I guess really important is setting up that psychological safe space, because what we often find with transition coaching is it's quite an emotive process. So it's really important for them to feel very safe in that environment. So I spend quite a lot of time doing group coaching as well. And obviously that's really important then to set up that trusting environment. So I think also might be worth sort of just educating your listeners on the different types of transition that you get, because there are multiple different types, and the experience that you have when you're transitioning through these different types is very different. So for example,
So before we get into, types of transitions, what for somebody who doesn't really know transition, in few words, how will you define transition in 5-6 words?
It is the psychological process that you go through when you're responding to change.
Okay. So process you go through when you are responding to change. Okay.
Indeed.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So different type of transitions now.
Yeah. So I guess you can have planned transitions. So for example, you might be planning to get married or planning to have a family. Those are big transitions in your life, but you're kind of predicting to have them. There can also be unplanned transitions, perhaps a bereavement or a redundancy situation. That is a very different experience. And so what we see when someone is going through an unplanned transition, that there's a lot more emotion involved, a lot more heartache. My dad was a doctor, and when he retired at a point that he was not expecting to. And he actually became mute it was only temporarily, but it was such a shock to the system to suddenly find himself without his work. Then, that's why I ended up becoming very interested in retirement. I think there's also another really subtle transition, which is the non-event. So if you think of perhaps a woman getting to age 40 and perhaps she hasn't been able to have children, or has got perhaps fertility issues, then there can be a kind of mourning of the loss of not being able to have children. So there are kind of non-event transitions as well that also come under the realm of transition coaching. So that's kind of the different types. Also, I think it's important to think about the different stages. And I think there are multiple different stages to the transition, and it is much more of a process. So I don't know if you want me to talk about models at all, but there are some models that I use within my coaching. Would that be helpful?
Yeah. So before we dive into the models of coaching, you said there are event-based transitions and there are non-event-based transitions.
Yes.
So for me, the non-event based transitions is basically a decisions in the acceptance of the decisions. Is that how you?
It may not be a decision, it may be imposed. So if someone can't have children for medical reasons, for example, it may not be a decision that they've made. It may be something that's been enforced upon them. So yeah, it's an event that hasn't been able to happen, a transition that hasn't been able to happen.
And even event-based transitions can be imposed, right? Like redundancy, you said.
Yes. So within the event, then you can get planned or
Mm,
unplanned.
mm,
And it is the unplanned ones where the processing is very emotive,
mm,
and it can be leave people feeling very hopeless, very lost, and not knowing what to do because they weren't expecting it.
mm.
So yeah, that can be quite traumatic.
So unplanned, of course, are very emotive, and because people are not expecting it and it happens and gets imposed, of course,
Mhm.
it can take longer as a coach for you to work with such clients, right?
Yes, yes, no, definitely can.
And the ones which are planned, give me
Mhm.
some examples of that as well.
So, for example, I do a lot of work with retirement coaching, and quite often those are very planned.
Mm-hmm.
And people have been thinking about them for 10, 15 years before they retire. So, I think actually the earlier people come to transition coaching, from my perspective, the better, because there's quite a lot of work that can happen in advance of making decisions, quite a
Mm-hmm.
lot of thinking that can go on before decisions are made.
So you're saying the better you plan and earlier you plan is better for you to transition.
I think that's what the research suggests, and that's what I've seen in my own experience as well. Starting early on and being holistic in your approach, the two really important things that I would say about any transition.
Hmm, hmm, hmm. Okay. So, what are the most common clients of transition coaching that you see? Are they retirement or maybe marriage, or what's the very common kind of clients that you work with?
Yeah, I mean, typically I've chosen to work in the retirement space, and I'll tell you a little bit about why I've chosen to do that in a minute.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of the other types of transition, it can be about exiting career and choosing to perhaps set up their own business or to choose a completely different career from
Mm-hmm.
what they've been doing already. It can be to change country. It can be to exit a relationship. So there's quite a lot of different coaching reasons why I could be dealing with transitions.
And you said you.
Even becoming, sorry,
Mhm. Sorry, go ahead. Even.
no, just sort of saying even people becoming like directors for the first time, perhaps owning a business for the first time, those kind of transitions as people get promoted
Mm.
can leave them feeling quite lost.
So, and talk to me now about the retirement transition coaching.
So I think really why this differs from other transitions, one of the reasons is that it's multifaceted. I don't think there's very many points in life where lots and lots of different things are changing at the same time. So you've got a change in your financial situation, change in your network, who you're
Mm.
dealing with, your routine. You've perhaps got a change in your relationship from being not seeing someone to seeing them all the time. You've got a change potentially in how you spend your time, your routine.
Mm.
So there's lots of things that are up in the air. So I'm attracted to retirement transitioning because of what happened to my father, but also because it's so complex, and you end up as a coach, it's quite challenging because you've got to be able to adapt and flex from potentially really practical issues like, how am I going to spend my time is quite a
Mm.
practical issue, to deep psychological discussions, sort of existential questions like, who am I now? Who am
Mm.
I now that I'm not doing this job anymore? So I love that kind of range and the flexibility that and adaptability that you need as a coach to work with retirees. So yeah, so that's what's attracted me to it, that multifaceted area. And actually some people also are without their housing. So we have people who are in the military or in religions who are given a house, and then when they retire, they are without a house. So
Mm.
that's quite interesting as well to
True.
decide where to live. Yeah.
And I also notice here now that the status quo is also changing there. So there are times it's difficult for a retiree to accept that I'm no longer the head of whatever I was heading. And I think
Mm,
the positions and the statuses when they're transitioning from there as well. Because know somebody who was a principal at a school, and when she retired,
mhm,
it was difficult for her to not to behave or act or believe that she's no longer a principal, and so
mm.
that kind of behavior transitioned into her
Yeah.
personal life as well.
I did some research last year with a big sort of partner firm, and they were all saying that when they go into a room once they've retired, nobody knows who they are. Whereas previously they could command a room when they went into it, everybody knew who they was and respected them. And
Yeah.
they lose that kind of status and nobody knows that they're the boss or were the boss.
Yeah.
So they have to reinvent themselves. So a lot of what we work on is about identity.
And is that really common for you? That
Yes.
especially when it is a planned transitioning.
Yeah. Even with the planned transitions. I think when I did my master's research, one of the things that was quite interesting is that when people, before they retired, what they were really concerned about is, will I have enough money to be able to retire? And how will I spend my time? So quite practical issues. But as soon as they had retired, it was much more deeper psychological concerns about identity. But they weren't really aware of that being an issue for them prior to retirement. It's really post-retirement that came into the fore.
I think when they start to live that life, the other issues I think kind of get, I mean, they face those things as well. And tell me, what else post retirement, which your clients don't foresee, they kind of then later on.
Yeah, I mean, this might be a good time to mention the Bridges model. And the Bridges model is a three-step model, and the middle stage is the stage that people experience post retirement, and that's what they call the neutral zone. And this is basically, it's sort of between two life chapters, if you like, and it can lead to people feeling very uncomfortable and unsettled, and actually dealing with some people who have attempted suicide because of the extent to how lost they feel. And that is a real surprise for people, that they are feeling quite so lost post-retirement. A lot of people pre-retirement are really looking forward to retiring, and they're thinking, wow, how can anyone, think it's a problem to have all this leisure time? But it's the experience of not having things in your diary that can leave people feeling quite lost, and quite often that lost sense of belonging as well, that the sense that they were a part of something, a part of a group when they were in work, and they can feel that lost sense of belonging to a team. I'm dealing with some doctors at the moment, and actually leaving the profession is a really important step for them that takes a long time to process. So yeah, it's fascinating that it is such an experience, but that is what people are telling me.
So you said Bridges model is one of the models that you use while you're coaching for retirement transition. So tell me a little bit detail of this model. What are the steps in the
Yeah.
model? Yeah.
Well, Bridges model was interestingly created in a business environment, and it was looking at that kind of psychological response to change. And there are basically three stages: endings, neutral zone, and beginnings. And I've slightly adapted it because I think there's something that happens within retirement, which is this pre-contemplation. So quite often people are thinking about their retirement in advance of actually going through the ending process. So at that point, what we're looking at are things like decision making. So it's, why am I going to leave? How am I going to leave? When am I going to leave? So those kind of decisions. So quite often that's when people will come to coaching, is to think through those decisions. And often people are quite stuck and they really don't know which decision to make. And there may be many options. So it's about working through those options with the client. And also, in terms of the pre-contemplation stage, there's thinking about what is a successful exit for me. So what does that look like in terms of handover, succession, in terms of legacy? Is there anything that I want to leave behind within my career? Is there a career legacy I want to leave? And so there's quite a lot of thinking in terms of the exit from work. But also, I think it's really important, as I say, that early thinking about what you might be doing after work. I remember talking to one lady who was saying she wished she'd have thought about things a lot earlier, because post her retirement, she went on to become a chair of a board. and she'd not had that experience before. And she said she wished she'd have tried to do that when she was in the work environment. Then she would have had that experience to go and do that and feel more comfortable doing that post-retirement. So I think there's a lot of thinking that you can do early on about how you might like to spend things, that and training potentially that you could do whilst you're in the workplace that could support what you do later on. So that's kind of my pre-contemplation stage. Then, then it's about exit. So it's about that actual exit process. And I find it very interesting that in the UK particularly, we haven't quite mastered the exit in a way that supports the employee who's leaving. And still people are finding that process really uncomfortable. So somebody who had been working for like 30 years at the same company, they get to their final day and it becomes really transactional. So they've got to hand back their ID, they've got to hand back their computer, their phone. And there's this kind of, they feel unrecognised, unvalued, because it's all become really transactional. There's a model which suggests that the end experience can tarnish all those good experiences for the last 30 years. And that's what I'm hearing. There's a real distaste about the experience, so much so that it colours how they view their 30 years previously, because they felt so unvalued when they left. It can be that the whole exit experience is really important for companies to get right.
Right. And it's not just about retirement. I think it's in any transition from one job to another
Yeah.
that can really tarnish. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That whole experience can be really horrible for some people. And so sometimes, particularly if it's a redundancy situation, that can also exacerbate how unloved they feel. So quite often we will be dealing with processing of the emotions around the exit. So some unfinished business that there may be, about putting to rest what's happened, and to really recognise and celebrate all the achievements that they did have, and sort of to go through the process that I guess they wished they'd have gone through with their company, to sort of think about the value that they did to give to the company and invest in the company. So that's kind of the endings phase. Then, as I say, the neutral zone is where there can be this real sense of discomfort. And what we tend to do in the neutral zone is to really kind of dig deep and look at resources. So to think through, what have they done previously when they've transitioned? We go through several transitions throughout life, but thinking through what's gone well in previous transitions and what's not gone well. What have they learned from prior transitions? That can be a really helpful place to start. And we quite often do like a life review, a life appraisal, and sort of look back on what experience they've had to date, what resources they've used to get to where they are. And that can be quite helpful because people forget their strengths, their skill set. And it's just a kind of reminder that they've got a lot of internal strength within themselves and transferable skills that is useful as they go through that kind of uncomfortable phase of the neutral zone.
And this neutral zone starts right after the exit.
Yeah, and interestingly, some people do experience like a honeymoon period. So quite often people post-retirement have booked to go on a holiday, or got some time off where they're going to do nothing. And we do see kind of a peak in their kind of psychological well-being. But then as soon as that kind of holiday is over, then it can be this dip in psychological well-being. And quite often, actually, we get those people who have had an unplanned exit, so those who perhaps bereavement or redundancy, can go into that low zone, if you like, immediately as soon as they exit.
Right.
Yeah.
And then comes the beginning.
Yes. So basically, the new beginning is about the new phase, whatever that might be. And obviously, with a lot of the people that I work with, it's about the retirement. So what does that look like? And here we're doing some very practical things here, which is about identifying what is it that's going to fulfill them. And quite often in the start, what people are looking at is rebalancing, redressing the balance, if you like. So quite often people in their work life may have found it quite stressful, quite intense, and what they're looking for is some peace. So they choose to spend kind of time doing quiet things and away from people just to kind of get some peace. And you get the opposite as well. People who have been quiet at work are looking to be around other people. So you get some kind of initially that desire to redress the balance. They've not spent time with family, it's about spending time with family. So you'd notice that in the beginning, and then it's about forging what that new life looks like. And it's about identifying what is going to be most fulfilling for them. So we do quite a lot of work on meaning and purpose, etc. at this point.
So, what's a typical duration of such a coaching intervention, from the endings to beginning, the whole intervention?
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, it will depend on a point at which people come. Quite often, they will come well in advance of exiting, so they're in the pre-contemplation stage. Other people have already retired and they're not sure what to do. So it depends on what stage they're at. If someone's coming at the pre-contemplation stage, then we would try and pace things out to kind of mirror the process as they retire, because I think there's value in them having pre-retirement conversations that just after exit conversations and then later on as well. So I would like coaching to go alongside the process. The reality is a lot of businesses will support pre-retirement, but nothing post-retirement. So a lot of the work I do is pre-retirement, and that is educating about what might happen next rather than obviously knowing what might happen next.
And are there organizations that sponsor such a coaching? You saying they
Yes.
do?
Yeah.
Okay. How does it work?
And how it works, most organisations will put on a pre-retirement course. So a lot of the courses I run are with groups of sort of 30 people. And what we will do is we will walk through the whole of the process, from endings, pre-contemplation endings, neutral zone, new beginnings. We'll walk through it all so that they feel equipped with what's coming, even though they're at the pre-retirement stage.
Okay. So it's more of a mentoring or a training with them on the process first.
It is, and actually one of the outcomes from retirement coaching, which a lot of people say is valuable to them, is understanding that it is a process, that they may be dips in their mood, but that actually with time they'll be fine.
Okay.
So it's that understanding that it is a process. Yeah.
Okay. And I'm also thinking now about when you said that in the beginning phase, you work with the clients to understand the meaning and the purpose and what's next now. How often do you find people finding now themselves lost?
When they're coming to discuss about meaning and purpose. Yeah, I mean, I think that's their way out of being lost. So, probably the best tool that we have to manage people outside of that sense of loss is themselves. So we do a lot of self-discovery, and we're looking at things like values, beliefs, skills, passions, strengths, motivators. We do a lot of work on that to be able to inform what will give them meaning, what will give them purpose in their future. I don't know if you've come across the Ikigai model at all. Yeah, so essentially what we're doing by gathering all of that information is we're looking at what they're good at, their skills and strengths, what they love, their passions, what the world needs, their values, and what you can be paid for, or your motivators, what rewards do you want. So it's the intersection of those four that will help them identify what will be most fulfilling for them. Yeah.
Is there kind of an assessment that you do to identify, or how do you do it? Or is it a conversational?
There are lots of questions, but there are lots of exercises. So we'll do a skills and strengths exercise to identify what their strengths are. We'll do sometimes a legacy conversation. So, if it was your 100th birthday, and you were looking back, what was it that you want to be, your friend to be saying about you at your 80th, 100th birthday, whatever it might be. So you get a sense of what's important to them, to really understand what their values are and what they're, and then we look at alignment. How aligned are they in what they're doing today versus where they'd like to be, and then look at closing any gaps that they might have.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Interesting.
Mm.
And Tessa, any other model apart from Bridges model that you use for?
Yeah, and I think just sort of going back to that resources piece in the middle zone, as I say, a lot of it we concentrate on the self, and it's about increasing their own awareness, understanding how to improve their resilience. Often it's about self-compassion as well. There can be a lot of negative self-talk going on, some self-sabotage perhaps. So it's about working with that to try and get them feeling more positive, more confident about what they're choosing to do. So the self is there's a model called Schlossberg's model, and Schlossberg talks about the 4 S's. So strategies, support, self, and situation. I've added a 5th S on there, which is spirituality as well. But yeah, the one that we spend the most amount of time on is the self, because that is a really strong resource, as you can imagine. The other resources, strategies, is about the how you exit. So if you've got a really strong work identity, somebody who perhaps has a real attachment to their work. So it could be because they're an entrepreneur and they own the business. It could be perhaps they're a doctor and so they really feel like their work is their calling. Then what can be really helpful is something called bridging techniques, which is where they diminish the amount of time or the amount of responsibility that they have. So they kind of distance themselves from their work over time. So they kind of reducing that attachment to work. And at the same time, or as an alternative bridging technique, is you increase your attachment to life after work. So, for example, if you were going to be doing a voluntary role, you might start that whilst you were still working. So we talk about strategies as to how someone might detach themselves from work or attach themselves to life post, life in retirement. So strategies is also about the phasing. So as I say, some people choose to have that honeymoon kind of holiday period.
Yeah.
But some people also really aren't sure how they want to spend their time. So they do trials. In fact, had one lady who took her husband out of work on a sabbatical, and they both stayed at home. They weren't allowed to socialise. They weren't allowed to go on any holidays, to see how they coped, being retired together. So, there are ways to trial retirement. It's a bit extreme, but, there are things that people can do whilst they're still working that gives them insight into what life might be afterwards. So strategies is a really important one of the 5 S's.
And it's really about the how of it, right? The strategies.
Yeah. Yes, it is. It's about how you're going to approach it.
So you said there are 4 S model, right? Strategies.
Yes.
Can you repeat the rest, please, for me?
Yes. So the strategies, support, self, and situation.
Okay. And then 5th one you added is spirituality, right?
That's correct. Yeah. So support wise, again, when I was doing some research last year, people who work really, really hard and kind of do 16-hour days, don't have a life outside of work, really struggle with the support side of things. They realise if they've been with the same company for 20, 30 years, that their support network is that company. And quite often, because they've worked so hard, they haven't spent any time forging relationships around where they live in their community. So support network can be all of a sudden cut off when someone exits work. So it's recognising the impact on your support network when you retire and thinking about what can I do now as early as possible to ensure that I've got a network there to support me post-retirement. And I work with some church ministers who move every 5 years. And because they move every 5 years, they found it really difficult to have long-term friendships. So they end up in a situation where they don't know where to move to, and they don't have that kind of strong sort of community to go and move to. They don't have a strong base.
Right.
So they find that really difficult to think about starting a network from scratch. Where's it going to be? How are they going to do it? So yeah, we end up talking about how do you socialize?
And
Yeah.
that is a need, right? I mean, for everybody.
Yeah, and it becomes interestingly more of a need. I think some people can get quite isolated in retirement. At one point, one or other, if it's just two of you, you end up in a situation where there may just be one of you. And I guess some of this is about being realistic about what's coming. And being prepared as much as you can be for that situation. Sometimes we do some exercises on strength of network, and people find that actually everything that they need from a support network comes from their partner. And there's this huge dependency on their partner, and that recognition that actually, wow, if something happened to them, I'd be absolutely lost. Yeah.
And then what
It's
happens if they recognize that if something happens to my partner, I'll be lost? Then what happens then?
Well, it's about them creating a network that is going to be there to support them should that happen. So what we will do is if there is that strong dependency, we'll look to widen their network and talk about how we do that. It will be different for every person. But I also find it quite interesting at this point, we will talk about family expectations. And it's very interesting because here in the UK, people don't really have conversations about who's going to be doing the childcare. And quite often there's an expectation with grandparents that they will be looking after the grandchildren, but that conversation never happens.
Yeah.
So the grandparents might be thinking, I'm going to go and tour the world. And the children are thinking, well, great, you've got on tap childcare. So sometimes it's about having conversations with the family about what is everyone expecting from retirement. And it's about negotiating the position. But some people may be wanting to have that grandparent role, but the children don't want that. So it's can be tricky.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's about
So
support, right?
Yeah, so support wise, it's about finding your tribe, the people that you're comfortable with, the people that bring you fun, bring you meaning. And quite often it's about having a collective purpose, doing something to a common goal can be really important as well. So we look at the different types of support. So the next S is, we talked about self. So the next S would be situation. And obviously, everybody's situation will differ, but the three key things that we talk about here is health, and that's physical health, mental health, can be housing as well, particularly if people are perhaps downsizing, moving abroad, or selling up and renting, whatever their situation. And the big question on finances as well is what is enough? So we'll do quite a lot of thinking around finance. We don't do any kind of advice. I leave that to their financial planners. We do a thinking around what is enough and how they get to that answer.
And then you've got spirituality, right, which is the fifth one.
Yeah, and I ended up adding this on because actually a lot of people who are coming to sort of their feast when I'm talking to them, quite a lot of them have mentioned that they haven't had a relationship with their spirituality, but they'd like to find more time to do that. So often it's been deprioritized when they've had a career, but now it feels more important for them to focus on. So for quite a lot of people, it's their first sort of venture into what their spirituality is and how might that look for them going forward. So it's a real discovery, and some of this is about that kind of existential question, who am I now? And kind of forging understanding about who am I and what does that look like going forward, and what is my spirituality, how is that important to me, and why is that important to me. So that ends up being an exploration. And I think one of the things that can happen, is particularly when I'm doing the group pre-retirement courses, is we end up with lots and lots of questions. That's why from a coaching perspective, I like to go on the journey with them. But with a pre-retirement course, really all they're leaving with is tons of questions to explore on their own. Yeah.
Interesting. I think the whole journey is can be difficult, can be easy, can be exciting, or can be, yeah, it really depends on what's the purpose of getting retired, and is it planned or unplanned or imposed on you.
Yeah.
And tell me, how do you differentiate between a regular life coaching or any other coaching to retirement or transitioning coaching?
Well, I think actually a lot of the principles are the same. A lot of the outcomes are even the same. You're talking about increasing their self-awareness.
Hmm.
You're talking about kind of focusing on things as well as looking at the big picture. You're talking about having a positive mindset, calling them to have accountability and take action. So a lot of those things are similar. I think it's the content that's different. And the fact that 1 minute you're talking about really practical things like health, what are you going to do to increase your water intake, versus something deeply philosophical. It's who am I now? And I think identity is the area that I'm particularly interested in, because I think people are really surprised to feel that lost sense of identity. And I think it's the fact that within retirement coaching, you're having those really deep questions as well as that really practical stuff. So it's the breadth and the range of what you're covering that I think is different. And that ability to be flexible becomes really important.
Right.
Yeah.
And what specifically got your interest in retirement coaching?
Yeah, I think it's a growing field. I think by 2037 in the UK, 25% of our population is going to be over 65. And obviously that is it's a world trend that there are more people hitting that retirement. And also we've got this new phase, what people are talking about, the 100-year life and Q3. So we've got this new kind of healthy phase after work and before we're kind of unable to do much. We've got this period of time where we can be active. So it's about how do we contribute and get value out of that time. So really, there's a lot of people that are sort of pioneers at the moment for how they're using that time. It's massively under-researched in terms of coaching. So when I did my dissertation, it was the first UK study on coaching across the retirement transition. So I know there's lots more work to do in this area. So that's exciting for me. But as I say, my dad had this experience where he became mute. And I think that sparked my interest, where I was like, well, why has this happened? And this whole identity crisis that he experienced has got me really interested in what does it mean to have a lost sense of identity, and how do you recraft it, and how do you find it again, and how do you build that when you're lost to begin with. Yeah.
And I think that kind of a coaching where you find that it's lost sense of identity there, I think more difficult to kind of take through the journey, take people through the
Yeah.
journey.
It is. It is really difficult to do. And I think that does take time. If someone does come with a lost sense of identity, that's not going to be a quick fix. And quite often I'm working alongside someone who's also seeing a therapist or seeing a counsellor. So my first degree is in psychology. So I think that makes me feel more comfortable walking up to the edge of where coaching and counselling transverse, and being in a position that I can refer should be, if that is needed.
Tessa, tell me an experience in your coaching practice where you found it was very difficult to work with a client, and what was happening with the client.
Yeah, I mean, I'm working with someone at the moment who's an entrepreneur, and they've run lots of different businesses, and they've attempted to retire before when they were much younger, and it didn't go well for them. So they've got a real fear of retiring again because they're worried about what might happen. And I think for those people who don't have a world outside of work, it is really tough for them to contemplate not working. And so there's a lot of work that needs to be done before this guy considers exiting, so that he is in the best place possible and doesn't have the tricky experience that he had last time.
So, would you also suggest people before they plan their retirement, they should rather attend some sort of a course or a training where they really understand what may come up after their retirement?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that people are really surprised about is how useful they found the pre retirement courses, because a lot of people think it's all going to be fine. And
Yeah,
they're like, well, why do I need to go on a course?
yeah,
Because it's great. And they realize that actually there's a lot to think about and a lot of work that can be done that will make their lives a lot easier, that transition a lot easier. And I think the intent of the pre-retirement course is to try and minimize that dip, that neutral zone dip, and to make them feel that they can go through that retirement transition as well equipped as possible.
and I think they would, of course, not have those shocks later because that will
Yeah,
help them.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I think some people I get some people sort of saying, I feel normal, because they felt really worried how they were feeling, because that sense of discombobulation that people talk about in the neutral zone, they really don't understand it. They get quite panicked by it. Knowing that that is a normal part of a transition process can be really comforting for people, because they realize that actually this is a process, it's going to take time, but I'll come out the other end. So that can be really comforting as well.
And apart from retirement transition coaching,
Mm.
have you ever had a very unusual transition experience that people say that I want to transition in this? And
It's interesting because sometimes when I talk about transition coaching, people think of that this is a gender reassignment coaching. It's not, but I've never experienced that. But I don't think there's been anything that's particularly unusual. I think that the non-event is really hard. I find that really hard because that is a lot about bereavement and a lot about loss, and it's really difficult if somebody has really craved something, perhaps a partner, and then they've never found a life partner and they're really mourning not having a family. I find that quite hard because you can't really, there's not much you can do to kind of reconcile themselves, with what's happened. So it's about finding other things to fulfill them. But yeah, that's hardest.
and isn't it just about acceptance then? You just have to accept it.
Yeah, I mean, some of the work I'm doing at the moment is with early retirees, so people who are retiring early due to ill health or mental health issues. And some of those people are at end of life, so some of them have got less than 6 months to live. And that's really hard to do that coaching as well. But it's about understanding their own boundaries, and a lot of them are health boundaries, energy levels, etc., and working within that. And a lot of it is about, we're doing legacy work. So what is it that they want to leave behind as an enduring memory of them? So it's very different coaching, but still it's hugely fulfilling for them to feel like they've got things in place for when they've gone. Some of it's about writing letters to loved ones, really thinking about their final wishes. So yeah, that can be very difficult, but very rewarding too. Yeah.
And give me more examples of such situations where you're handling, I mean, when uh, that they have got limited time in life and you're working with them. Give me more examples, specific examples of what are those situations.
So actually, it was someone that came to one of the courses, and it was evident that it wasn't appropriate for him. He showed up with an oxygen tank. And so I kind of took him to one side to understand his situation. And he explained that he was end of life. And so I said, I think you need one-to-one coaching. You shouldn't be in this group situation. So I spoke to the employer and ended up doing one-to-one with that person. And I guess it is a lot about accepting where you are, but also it's about an emotional processing. It's a bereavement for what you anticipated and hoped for. You might have had certain expectations about this person was wanting to travel with his family, and that's not possible. It's very difficult to travel given his condition. So it's about mourning what he'd hoped for and recognizing that that wasn't possible, but just kind of really accepting that those boundaries exist now and being really clear on what he can do. So we do a lot of work about what's within his control, what's within his influence.
Right.
and how to do something as fulfilling as possible given his constraints. So it's about being quite creative, to be fair,
Hmm.
but leaning on that support network and not being afraid to ask for support, which can be a situation that is, it's difficult to organise going somewhere with an oxygen tank, but it's not impossible. So
Right.
it's about, I guess, giving them encouragement to push themselves a little bit outside of their comfort zone to get those life experiences that they're seeking.
How common have you found out such situations?
Well, I would say there are, if you look at the sort of insurance statistics, I think it's 59% of over 65s have two or more serious illnesses, and
Mm.
that could be mental health or physical health. So it's very, very common. And so, in terms of organizations that are working, offering coaching to those with ill health, there's not very many.
Mm.
But those that do have found it really, really helpful, and it's helpful for them because they feel like they've done something positive for that
Right.
person, and it's really helpful for the individual to have that time and space to process what's happened to them. So it is quite common. I guess I mean, in terms of companies, there's only two companies that I work with that
Okay.
do this. But yeah, it's a good proportion of their employees, more than you would think.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, more than you would
And I
think.
think for the individual as well, it's very relieving
Yeah,
going through such a
it
trauma.
is. It is. And I think this kind of it's okay to not be okay, that kind of feeling that there's a lot of emotion that comes up understandably when we're dealing with individuals who are end of life. And there's a lot of anger, a lot of frustration, and it's but getting those things out, it does make them feel better, and processing it and accepting that there's nothing they can do to change what's happening. So it's about sort of living with whatever condition they have, and yeah, as much as they can.
Right.
Yeah.
And tell me overall with your work and your experience that you
Mhm.
have, working with clients on transitioning coaching.
Mhm.
How many people you find out that their plans of retiring is successful, and sometimes, I mean, they're happy or they're not happy after retirement? What is generally the outcome that you find?
Yeah, I mean, according to research, there are four typical pathways, and the one that I've talked through, which follows the Bridges model, is the most common. But for 25 to 30% of people, there is a decline in well-being on
Mm.
retirement. So that can happen. But there is also, for those who have really, really stressed at work, when
Mm.
they retire, there can be an improvement in their psychological well-being. There is also the fourth pathway is that it stays the same. So these are the people that go from working into doing 5 or 6 voluntary roles, who are working basically but not getting paid for it, or doing lots of different roles, so they're keeping busy,
Right.
so they don't see a change in their
Mm.
psychological well-being. They just carry on. So yeah, I think in terms of the success of coaching, and because coaching is so tailored to the individual, then the success is massive. I think it's interesting because it is a mix of practical and psychological topics that we're covering, but generally, obviously, as in any coaching, it's about empowering them to find their own way and identify what it is that they need to find out that will give them a fulfilling existence, whatever constraints they might be operating under. So that journey to as a thought partner to help them to reach those decisions. I was asked the other day, actually, had I ever had anyone who didn't achieve what they set out to achieve? And I haven't. And I think it's because when people get to retirement age, they're really serious
Right.
about what's coming. They're really intent on making the best of this next phase. So they are invested, they are doing the homework, they are really putting the hours in to try and work out what it is that they want to do. So most people that come to coaching are really invested in getting somewhere. So I think it's that makes a difference.
Right. And I also see that while people want to retire, but they still want to keep themselves busy. Right.
Yes. definitely.
It's not just getting retired and doing nothing, right?
No. And I think that is most common situation, is that what we're looking at here for most people is not to do nothing. It's to do something. And it's working out what that something is.
Hmm.
For some people, it's really important to give back. So it's about looking at voluntary roles, about charity roles, about mentoring roles. Quite a lot of people go on to mentor. For others, it's about doing something that they always wished they wanted to do. I had somebody who did a degree in environmental science, and when they retired, they went back to working in forestry because they'd gone off in an accountancy career.
Yeah.
They went back to what was a real passion for them. So see a lot of people doing that. Quite often see what I call a portfolio. So people doing some voluntary work, some paid work, and doing a range of different things.
Interesting. And
Mm.
Tessa, so if one would like to know more about your work, how is it that
Mhm.
they can contact you?
Well, my website is www.proficiocoaching.com, and I can give you my details to put out. But yeah, basically LinkedIn, Tessa Dodwell on LinkedIn, and love to talk to people about it. And as I say, it's really under research. So if any of your listeners are interested in what research is out there and looking to do a master's or a PhD in an area, I would highly encourage retirement coaching because it's under researched and there's going to be so much more of it about.
So your LinkedIn, your website, of course, we're going to paste the link of them in the description section, and people would, of course, love to contact you and know more
Mhm.
about your work that you're doing. Tessa, it was a learning experience today for me, and I really enjoyed what you're doing and what you're doing, what your research is.
Mhm.
Thank you so much for taking this time out today, and
No, thank you.
I'm looking forward to connecting with you again, Tessa.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye bye. All right, Tessa. So we are done.
Hmm. Okay, thank you. I haven't been able to see you actually on the screen.
Is it?
Yeah, so you're frozen. There's a frozen picture of you.
I have no idea when, because I can see you when
Oh,
I.
you can see me. I haven't been eye contacting you because I can't see you. So I've been looking all around the place.
And I'm wondering why is it that you would look up when you talk to me?
Yeah, that's why, because there's nothing here. Sorry.
No problem. We could always pause, by the way, because the system allows us to cut in between and
Okay.
edit. Yeah, we could have told him, but I'm
Okay.
sure it wasn't very evident.
Okay,
Yeah,
good,
yeah,
good.
yeah.
Brilliant. No, that's interesting. And I wasn't sure how much of a conversation this was going to be. So I would have asked you some questions, but I thought I better not because we didn't discuss that ahead. Yeah, no.
It's okay. You can ask me if you would like
Yeah.
to now, because we can always cut
Well,
and edit and do all of that.
okay. Well, Harris, what are your thoughts on retirement?
About me retiring, are you saying?
Yeah. Have you thought about it? Have you got any
Not yet.
hopes,
No,
expectations?
no. And in fact, the question that I asked you is actually my thinking that there's no retirement ever in life,
Hmm.
because you always want to be busy, even when you retire. And I'm somebody who's
Hmm.
doing what I love doing. So even when
Yes.
I retire, I'm going to do what I'm going to do, what I'm doing right now. So I
Yeah.
think for me, that's not an option
Yeah.
unless there's a physical or any other situation which
Hmm.
would disable me to not to continue. Uh,
Yeah. No, it is interesting. And likewise, I'm doing what I love. So this doesn't feel like retirement,
right.
but I will likewise be continuing doing this
Right,
forever.
right. Maybe I'm going to reduce the volume of work and all of that, maybe because of the physical energy level. But
Hmm.
again, no plans to not to do what I do.
Any plans to do writing, research?
Yes, I have been thinking to write a book now for quite some
Mm.
time. So I'm planning to do start that now. How about yourself?
Yeah, likewise. I really want to work on identity and I guess how people recraft their identity when they've lost it, because there isn't much out there on that. So yeah,
Yeah,
I'm looking to write that.
and that's not just about retirement. I think that's
No,
yeah,
exactly.
it's really
Yeah.
beyond. It's even after marriage sometimes. It's
Yes.
after
Yeah.
kids.
Exactly. Exactly. Parental identity is very different
Yeah,
to pre-parental. Yeah,
yeah.
agreed.
And even your profession, your education, all of that, I think the transition gets you to relook at how you look at your identity.
Exactly. Is it? One of the things I find quite interesting is my daughter's 18, and so been thinking about her career, etc. And all of the things that I've been going through with
Mm,
her are all of the things I go through
mm.
with my retirees, and I find it surprising that they don't know. They just haven't figured out what it is that really fulfills them,
Yeah.
even at retirement age. I find that surprising. It's true for a lot of people.
For me, I feel that anything, even if it fulfills you now, I think can be temporary, because I think
Yes.
we all have a need of variety in life.
Mm,
So, what is fulfilling for me today may not be tomorrow, which I don't know.
yeah.
But I also need to know there's always a limit to everything, too.
True.
Yeah. So, it really depends, I think, how practically you think about your life, too.
Yes. Yeah. And how much you want to know what's coming and how much you want to just go with the flow.
Right. I mean,
Yeah.
for me, life has been really more about to go with the flow than try and control everything. Because if you try and control, I think you feel all the more sad about everything.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I
Well,
think
you're more likely to get regrets.
yes, more regrets, more dissatisfaction.
Mm-hmm.
Not enjoying the moment for me. But I think if one needs to be very practical in terms of not everything is in our control and is in our hands.
Yeah. Yeah. No, true. Very true. Okay.
Thank you, Tessa, for your time today. And
Thank
I'm
you.
looking forward to catching up with you again because we do plan to do another podcast with most of our guests.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one thing I haven't mentioned is I actually do a retirement coaching course for coaches.
Okay.
So I do some training. Is that something that CTA would be interested in at all?
Definitely, Tessa. That's an
Oh,
interesting thing that you
okay.
spoke about. Why not? I mean, could you send us a little bit of a
Yeah,
write up
of
and a
course.
proposal or something like that so that
Yeah,
for us?
yeah, can
Yeah.
do that. No problem.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
And we also, by the way, are a believer of mentoring, not just coaching, because
Mm,
there is not much research done on mentoring and the right way of doing
no,
mentoring.
agreed.
And
Yeah.
we would also like to expand and work with you if you're interested to kind of look at uh, how do we promote mentoring together, not just coaching. Because
Mm,
our thinking is that whenever there is a content which is outlined by the coach, it's more of a
hmm.
mentoring.
Yeah, and exactly. I do that with retirement, 100%,
Yeah.
because you're setting out models, you're setting out examples that
Right.
is informing people.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So we do have a sister concern called International Mentoring Center. Yeah.
Hmm.
And we would also like you to kind of be a guest over there too, because we do some webinars with the community of mentors. And
Hmm.
we, by the way, those who have got a program, so it's an affiliation body where we recognize those mentors who are doing mentor training or a training which has got mentoring involved, and we kind
Hmm.
of accredit their programs if you're interested to get
Okay.
accreditation so that you can, because when you
Yeah.
when you're training coaches you probably give them CCE units, correct? I
CPD. Yeah.
CPD of CPD from where, as in, or the
So
CPD
continuing for professional development. Yeah. CPD
of
group. Yeah.
ICF or somewhere else?
No, so I'm not. I'm going through the ICF process. I'm EMCC at the moment.
Okay.
Yeah. So I haven't got ICF yet, but
Okay.
I will do soon.
Yeah, yeah, I'm sure but I think we were also looking at if you're interested in tying up with us on mentoring credentials and mentoring accreditation
Hmm.
for your program.
Yeah. No, definitely.
I will
Yeah.
have one of my team member get in touch with you. And if you
Brilliant.
could also share with me your write up on the program. How we generally work is that through our community, we roll out short courses to our members, and they are basically courses for the coaches and mentors, those who are already
Hmm.
practicing more advanced courses like yourself that you're doing. And of course, we tell them it's on a subsidized price because you're going to get people in bulk from us and all of that. So you can share with me details, and we
Hmm.
should leverage our existence in our community.
Wonderful. Sounds great.
So
Good.
do send me the details, and we'll take it
Will
forward from
do.
there, Tessa.
Fabulous. Thank you very much. And when will I hear the podcast? When will it be going out?
It will take about 4 to 6 weeks, by the way. because we are keeping it that kind of a backup with us. Thank you, Tessa. Pleasure. Thank you. Bye.